and we just have to learn to be as good as they are. I would also say we should be prepared to retaliate when they do things like this recent surcharge on American trucks. Within 24 hours, we should hit something that's very high profit to them and say, okay, you want to play games? That's not going to come to the U.S. And there are lots of ways to do it within the gap. The French once took all Japanese imports through one city and only had a third as many agents there as they needed. And the line of trucks was like 30 miles long waiting to be inspected when the Japanese said, oh, you really want to negotiate. The French said, you got it. And you have to sometimes have that attitude. But we should not be suckers, and we should not be soft, and we should not assume that we have to be nice to the Chinese dictatorship so that they don't have their feelings hurt.
Mr. Speaker, first, welcome. A lot's being said today about the role and function of the Department of Education. And being a member of a local school board, obviously one of the biggest expenditures the state has in educating the young people. What are your thoughts about the role, function, and purpose of the Department of Education, particularly relative to some of the unfunded and underfunded mandates?
I think that we should dramatically shrink the Department of Education, eliminate virtually all the regulations, return power to the states, and frankly, I would meddle a little bit in Des Moines and suggest that the State Department of Education ought to go through a similar shrinking and return power back to the school boards. I think we've made a huge mistake centralizing education. I also think we ought to recognize that the current model of curriculums is entirely wrong. I mean, it bureaucratizes learning and it tells kids to slow down to the rate that the State Department of Education says, which is really crippling for gifted children, and is a profoundly wrong model. So, but I'd like that to be done at the local level. I'd also re-privatize the student loan program. My brother used to work in the State Department of Pennsylvania, collecting student loan money, particularly from doctors who borrowed lots of money. And he will tell you stories about having the federal government try to administer a program like that guarantees a level of fraud and a level of failure to collect that will be staggering in another 10 years. And the sooner we get it back to the private sector, where people have a real incentive to figure out what to do, the more money will save the taxpayer, and the better it will be for students.
Hi, Mr. Speaker. My name is Jim. I talked to you a few weeks ago about Strong America Now on the telephone. If anybody's not familiar with Strong America Now, there's flyers out on the table. But Mitt Romney is the only candidate in Obama that haven't signed on to this program, cutting federal waste by $500 billion a year. And I want you to elaborate a little bit on what you're going to do about Strong America Now. One other thing I'd like to say is Mitt Romney and Bill arrived the other night, says he doesn't believe, Mitt says he doesn't believe Obama's a socialist, which I mean he's catering to the middle. He believes he's in over his head. But Obama, I believe, is want a caliphate for one world order, just like Ron Paul doesn't believe the extreme Muslims are not going to do anything to America. But I believe it's a religion, it's another caliphate, that they will destroy us if we do not believe in their religion. Thank you.
Well, you sort of covered about 3 zones there. Let me work my way back. Let me say, I do disagree deeply with Ron Paul about the danger of an Iranian nuclear weapon, and I disagree with him deeply about the survival of Israel. I think it's very important, both morally and practically, that Israel survive, and that the United States recognize that a threat to destroy Israel is, in fact, a very severe long-term threat to the U.S., and that an Iranian nuclear weapon is a very dangerous thing. So, on foreign policy, I'm just profoundly different from Ron Paul's view. I'm surprised, actually, that Governor Romney hasn't signed Strong America Now, because as a manager, it should be pretty obvious to him. For those of you who don't know, Strong America Now is an effort to take the concepts of modern management, a system called Lean Six Sigma, and apply it to the federal government. And the estimate is that if you took what you would see in any really modern, I've been to, for example, if you go to Pella, and then you go into the Pella windows, or you go to Revere, you'll see the application of modern Six Sigma. And if you go and talk to anybody who's applying this, they'll tell you it is a dramatic improvement in efficiency and creativity and reduction in waste. And the estimate is it will save $500 billion a year in the federal government. I think that's an underestimate, candidate. But it is a very profound change. It means the end of the 130-year-old civil service model. It means the end of the internal regulatory model that makes it so hard to change things. Because the essence of quality is continuous improvement. You literally, every day you do things a little bit better. Cliss and I recently visited the plant in Charleston, South Carolina, where Boeing is making the 787 Dreamliner. And they have one particular workstation that currently takes 16 days to get a particular thing done in building this huge airline. And their goal is to get it down to 6 days with the same workforce. And I looked at that and I thought, okay, from 16 to 6, imagine applying that at the Department of Labor or the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or you name it. And you suddenly begin to realize how much waste would drop out of the federal government if you simply applied modern systems to it. So I'm a big believer. Mike George has been very heroic as a citizen. He took his own money, which he had made as a management consultant, and he helped create Strong America Now. And I'm a big fan of that model. We're getting you a pretty good workout today.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for coming here today. Your opponents have painted you as a fan of cap and trade and heavily restrictive environmental policies which would cripple our economy. I'd like to hear your thoughts in rebuttal to those commercials.
I want to use this as an example. And I hope you all don't mind my sharing with you my perplexity, okay? Let me say up front, the dumbest thing I've done in the last 4 years was sit on the couch with Nancy Pelosi, okay? And I can't defend it. It was just dumb. Okay, I'm not going to defend it. And if somebody wants to run an ad and say, there are moments when Newt Gingrich shows a total lack of judgment, and this was one of them, I'll laugh with the rest of it, okay? But let me, and I don't mind an opponent who takes a clean shot and says, I got you. They then go from there, and frankly, they plain lie. I don't know any other word for it. I testified at Energy and Commerce against cap and trade immediately after Al Gore. You can go to newt.org and you see a video of the testimony. I helped defeat cap and trade in the Senate through American Solutions, working very aggressively to attack it. And what they do is they take something that was real. Well, in 1991, as a Republican whip, I helped pass a very narrow version which applied to sulfuric acid in large electric generating plants for the purpose of eliminating acid rain, which was destroying the lakes in New Hampshire and New England. Now, it was a very controlled, very small program that worked. And everybody agrees it was less expensive as a way of getting rid of acid rain than a government bureaucracy would have been. So they take that, they skip past the fact that I totally opposed the new model of cap and trade, which is the EPA using carbon to run the national economy. They take away the fact that the delegation I sent to Kyoto as Speaker of the House opposed the Kyoto Agreement. And so they then come up with this grotesque thing which says, this is why Lincoln said if you can't get him to agree 2 + 2 = 4, you have no hope of winning the argument. They say, okay, since he sat on the couch, he must be for cap and trade, even though he testified against cap and trade and helped defeat it. And I just think that's just, that's everything that's sick about our current political system. I don't mind shots taken at me for things I've done that work smart, but for somebody to go out and grotesquely distort my experience, I don't know quite how to answer it. It's taken great discipline to not run ads that counter to it. But I just think every Iowan has a chance on the 3rd to go in and say, we're going to teach people that negative campaigns don't work by voting against everybody who's been running a negative campaign. And that's my hope, is that the people of Iowa will be just sickened by the level of negativity. He is getting a workout. He's like, he's going to ask a question while he's walking.
Right. I know that, let me get on one of these sides here. I know that you have immigration policy, and that's close to my heart. When I married my wife, she's a foreign boy from the Philippines. After we were married, it took 8 months and a congressman to get the paperwork put through for her to come to the States and us to live as a married couple. When we wanted to bring her mother over, it took a year and the intervention of a congressman to get the paperwork pushed through. When we decided to adopt my son, who I have with me today, it took 2 years and the intervention of a congressman to get the paperwork through. What are you going to do to deal with the overall immigration bureaucracy that, in my opinion, will resolve all the illegal immigration?
This is a very powerful and a very human question. And if you look at my proposal for immigration reform, which starts with controlling the border by January 1 of 2014, then has English as the official language of government, and then has a requirement to learn more thoroughly American history before becoming a citizen, including, I would suggest, our own American-born children should learn American history more thoroughly before voting. The next thing I go to is fixing the current legal visa system, and that's where the Strong America Now guys are a help. I mean, we should be applying modern systems. I think to visit the U.S. as a tourist in Brazil today is a 174-day wait. I mean, if you're Disney World and you're saying how many people might come to the U.S. if it weren't humiliating, expensive, and frustrating, how many more tourist dollars would we have? They think it's billions of dollars. You look at families, and again, we used to have pretty solid rules that said, yes, you can get somebody to come visit you if you will guarantee that they will not become a burden on the country. So you'd have to be willing to say, I'll underwrite them, I'll sign for them. I mean, there are ways you can do this that are practical and make sense. We want business people to come here easily, because we want them to come here to do business. So it's important to have, I think, a very fundamental overhaul of the State Department and Homeland Security bureaucracy, part of which is just pure paperwork, and part of it's attitude. I had the same experience even before I became a congressman. I had a Palestinian Christian couple. Actually, the husband was American-born and taught with me, and his wife was Palestinian Christian. They wanted to get her mother over in time to celebrate Christmas. Now, they were prepared to post a bond. They were prepared to be responsible. And trying to deal with the State Department and the embassy was my first introduction. I wasn't even sworn in. My first introduction, so I'm totally with you on that. And I think people need to separate how do we make it easier to come here legally while making it virtually impossible to come here illegally. Because they're different problems, but they have a mutual impact. If you make it easier to come in and out legally, you have a lot fewer people trying to sneak into the country. Now, back.
When you're president, do you the work necessary to make sure that the United Nations Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights is fully, completely implemented in the United States? Since we're one of only 2 nations in the world that was not signed or implemented it or ratified it through our Congress. We hear a lot about human rights in this country. We're one of the 2 nations that does not abide by the rule of law as set down by the UN Charter and as indicated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So what I ask you, your president, will your first job be to fully, completely implement the United Nations Convention on Economic, Cultural, and Social Rights?
Well, I'd have to look carefully at it, but my instinct is probably not. Let me take the example you just used. You just said all these countries have signed up to a Convention on Human Rights. Well, look at Saudi Arabia, where you can't have a church, you can't have a synagogue, where women have extraordinarily limited roles. Look at Iran, where a girl was hung for walking in the park with an older man hand in hand. Was hung. That's human rights. Where people who are homosexual can be killed. That's human rights. I think there are a lot of countries that sign a lot of things that have